Let's dive into that Cmotion now, and the first and the obvious question is, what is Cmotion? Well, mainly it's a parametric cyclic motion generator, and does it sound complicated? Well, not really. Let's simplify this and say that it's designed to create looping animations based on expressions or actions, as you will see, and it's mostly geared towards creating walk cycles, but I assure you it can do far more than that, as you will see, since it is very robust and flexible system, but it is also quite deep and complex, so I will give my best to explain it in detail so you don't have a lot of question marks after this lesson, and for that purpose I have these two objects that will serve as an example of what this Cmotion does, and let's start by adding this Cmotion guy in our scene. So you'll find it here under character menu, so Cmotion, and as you can see, by default it comes disabled unless you create it with that add walk button that we have in character object, but more about this a little bit later. So let's enable it, and here in the attributes manager it really looks scary. It has quite a few fancy terms and lots of parameters, but it isn't that bad as it seems at first glance, and we'll go slowly and try to explain things in most simple manner. Notice that there are a lot of fancy naming like interpolated, gradient, or hub options, target options, or stuff like that. But also notice there are some naming conventions for parameters such as walk or stride that imply that this Cmotion guy has a lot of to do with walk cycles or motion similar to walk cycles. So this is pretty common for naming convention, and it is basically something you can feel at home here. So for example, here we have a static walk, we have a line walk and path walk, which are pretty much self-explanatory, but let's just for a moment disregard this complete section and concentrate on this action area here. The general idea behind this Cmotion is that you select your object, simply drop it inside and assign certain actions to it. And you can assign actions by simply selecting that object once it is in the list and apply an action you want. And you can see here under this drop-down menu, which is actually cut off, there is a quite big list of available actions, and because of this fact and the fact that this complete Cmotion guy demands a lot of screen real estate, I'm really keen to create this new manager like this and simply dock it here so we have everything visible, because otherwise due to recording area you won't be able to see available parameters or, for example, that function graph we will work with. So I think this is much better solution. Now you can see we have two attribute managers, but that's simplifying. We can maybe log this guy to only this Cmotion object, and just to simplify arranging these windows like this, you see I have this Cmotion layout already done, so it's just a little bit tweaked, so just a little bit to the left with this pane. Nothing is changed, okay? And the reason for it is we can see everything inside, and we won't have to use these scroll bars inside this attributes manager. We can actually lock that guy now, so it will only display parameters of this Cmotion, and it will do so regardless, even if I deselect this Cmotion guy. So that's pretty basic. We covered that in volume 1. We can now freely continue. So here is my object inside the list, and I can apply any action to it. So I can apply a certain behavior. So in this case, we have a lot of options. So we can apply position action, we can apply rotation action, and we can apply various other actions. So let's start with really simple things. So this lift action, if I click add, once my object is selected, I'll get a lift action subordinated under my object. So Let's see what this is all about and select this action, and you can see that creating this new layout was really a good idea, because here we would have problems seeing this completely. So now when we have our action, probably some of you noticed that this object actually moved a little bit, and it moved by this value here. So if you change this value, it will simply move. So let's say maybe 10 here, no reason, just to have some obvious movement, and let's hit play and see what happens. And this is what happens. Our object is traveling up and down exactly according to this spline in certain time span, and that time span is defined here. So this motion with this parameter, with this value, will happen in this time. So if I double this to, let's say, 60, the motion will become slower. So that's the first logical relation for you to understand. So this guy defines in how much time everything here will happen. Okay, so I know this can look a little bit scary and a lot of parameters, but let's go slowly. So now my object is traveling slower simply because it has much more time to do this motion described here with this spline. So you can, of course, move these spline points, delete them, do anything you want to create a cyclic motion of your own. For that matter, to make things even worse and scare off the ones that are still watching, is if you right click on this guy, you have a huge menu here, and actually it is cut off also. So maybe if I right click here, you will see the multitude of commands. So we have the commands that are pretty much common to timeline editor, so we can frame all, frame selected, we can enable snapping, which is really useful. So these little guys will snap to these grid points, and you can even navigate just as in the timeline, and this grid will be dynamically more dense as you navigate. So if I zoom in a little bit more, you see you have a lot more grid points. So perfect and precise positioning is possible. Now, just for the sake of the tutorial, I'll create exactly new manager, because I want to show you what this right click menu contains. So here you have a bunch of things, so we'll go slowly with it, but I'm pretty sure we won't be able to cover everything. So for example, you can link end positions. So if you move this guy, naturally the other end will follow, because it's all under paradigm of cyclic motion. Okay, let's disable that. And once again, right click, you can link end tangents, you can zero them out, you can reset the spline, which will give you this motion. Okay, so it's slowly lifting to reach this value at this point, very similar to what we had in our animation crash course. We also have option to select all. We have various spline presets, and we can change the type of interpolation between points. We can flip, maybe we can mirror, we can even show this spline graph on its own if you really need more space in separate windows. So how about that? This is really scary, and I'm sure it sounds really complicated, but just hang on and you will see it's not the case. So this is a deep, complex, robust and flexible system. So let's actually load one of these spline presets, and we can go with this sin, which is actually a sine wave. So this will give you a nice, natural, soft motion. You may think that something is wrong, but actually we don't see the complete spline. You want to frame all like this, so we see the complete spline, and watch the motion. Here we can zoom in a little bit. I'm just working on this single guy at the moment, and I'll use this one later in this lesson. So if I, for example, increase this, I'll basically increase the amplitude. So it will go to this value, but in the same manner. here with this mix guy, you can basically determine how much of this complete value will be taken into account. So let's just tune this down and you will see it will take just, in this case, 27% of all this. This variation is really simple. So if I put this to, let's say, 100%, it will randomly choose positions from this spline. So it will not always behave exactly the same. It will go a little bit to 75 maybe, or 50 or stuff like that. So it will have a little bit of variation. I hope that makes sense. So let's put this back to default values so we can continue. Now, let me explain this blend guy, which is actually a blending mode for this complete motion. Currently, it's in absolute mode, so it will override everything, and other motions that contain the same action will not contribute. So let's actually visualize that. So I will select my object once again and apply another lift action like this. So we have two lift actions, and currently let's set this to 100 centimeters. Since it is the last in the list, it will completely override this previous one. So you can change this and our object won't respond at all. So let's put this to 10 and show that it will respond to this last guy. So if the actions are in absolute mode, the last one is considered, everything else is disregarded. And you assumed correctly, these other modes are simply made to mix between two actions. So for example, if our first action is 50 centimeters, and let's put this value also to 50, only this last one will be taken into account, simply because it is in absolute mode. But see what happens if I, for example, add this, and you'll notice a change. It actually adds 50 centimeters to this existing action. So now they're combined. Okay, I hope that makes sense. And let me just illustrate this a little bit better, and I will also load a sine wave here. Let me frame all, and for this guy also sine wave. So now we have completely the same motion. And if I put this to 0, only this 50 centimeters will happen. If I increase this, it will add to this motion. Naturally, if I put this to, let's say, subtract, the object will stop. That is because this 50 centimeters is subtracted from this one. Okay, so that's 0. Nothing will move. It will have no position y value. So if we just enter 51 here, we'll get a slight motion. Hope you will be able to see this. Let's try maybe 60. Now we are having 10 centimeters of movement based on these two guys. I think this is really simple and logical to understand. And with these blend modes, you have a lot of freedom, flexibility, and power to mix two motions together. So you can maybe create two or more lift effects and change the blending mode, change the duration, change the shape of this spline, and create really complex motion without any actual keyframes. So that's really powerful. Now here's one important thing and concept you have to understand, and it really confuses a lot of people. So here in this window you have these hub options and target options. So let's simplify and say that hub is actually a parent and origin of your motion. It is the master object from which every motion originates. So in this case, our object 1, this guy, is also a hub. So this is a local hub. And what this target options means, and every single object you subordinate, for example like this one, under this group, so not like a separate object. You see, if I hide this guy, you can actually see that this guy is a child object, and that's what it's making it a target. So if it is under the hub, it is a target. Okay, I hope that makes sense. And these first two guys, those are global options. So this is a master controller, master hub. Now, if I press play, you will see some of Cmotion walk cycle genes kick in. So let's see what happens. And you see this guy is behaving a little bit oddly. So let's actually get rid of this lift action and reset this spline. So it is obviously something odd here. And notice this guy travels as it should from this point to this point, but this guy is going forward then backwards. So what seems to be the problem? And the answer is there isn't a problem. That's simply how it is because of these options here, which are accessible for every single of these guys. They won't be accessible for targets or actions, obviously, but they will be accessible for every single object that is inside this list. So here we have quite a few things that are a little bit unintuitive to understand, but let's go quickly over them, and I'm sure they will make a lot more sense when I will demonstrate this technique on a simple character. Let's just, for the sake of demonstration, briefly turn this off, and once you do that, the objects will snap back to their original pose. And the reason I'm doing this is I want to copy this guy. I'll rename it to free, and let's actually create a new material, so just a derivation of this one, and use some other color, maybe this one, and also in luminance channel, because it's much more easier in the viewport to see. And let me just transform this by some amount, so let's say maybe 120, 110, something like this, and zoom on that a little bit, and I will apply that material. So just a small explanation before I show you that on a much more interesting and easier to understand example. Now notice that this driver parameter is set to steps. There is also none, hub, path, and steps, and remember this value, so 25%. And this is where walk cycle genes come into play with this Cmotion guy. So we can enable it, and let's drop this third guy also as a child of this one. Now under that object 3, notice that this phase is set to -25. So it really anticipated that we want to create some sort of a walk. Okay, so let me hit play and show you what I mean. So a really simple cyclic foot motion. So you do have to take into account that Cmotion is generally geared towards creating character motion and walking and stuff like that. So bear that in mind, and some things will have a lot more sense. Now let's explain these parameters a bit. So we'll hit play for that purpose, and let's change the phase on this guy to 100%. So you won't see any real difference until you do something on the other guy. You see they're becoming really out of sync, and this is simply the phase of the cyclic movement. So for example, you could change this also, maybe something like this, so they will behave differently. Now we can set this to 0, and they will be in sync all the time. I hope that makes sense. So you're adjusting the phase of the movement for these guys individually. Of course, there are some position values, so you can create a discrepancy between them. You can also do that horizontally, like this. And it is very useful to prevent character from stepping on its own toes, and of course, vertical correction also. So I really hope this makes sense so far, because otherwise we will have troubles in the later lessons. And let's actually stop this now, and I'll just get rid of these two guys and simply get rid of those actions also, and disable this Cmotion for a moment. And maybe I can even reset my object to the world center, just to be able to demonstrate things better. We can also get rid of this lift action. And let's enable this Cmotion guy here, otherwise it won't do anything. So let's explain this a little bit better. So these hub options here, this is a general master controller. So anything you assign to it, let's maybe go with push in Z and add action. So anything you assign to it will be transferred to all hubs. So if you have a zillion objects here, they will all receive this action. So let's just demonstrate that. So let's enter 10 here, press play, and here is the issue. You shouldn't forget anything. So this spline means no motion. So now we have a slight motion. Let's actually put this to 100 so it's really nice and clear. So you see, this hub is a local hub, and it really doesn't have any action assigned to it. It's simply inheriting from its master hub. Okay, so let me stop this. On the other hand, if I simply move this action to drive this object now, this local hub, then I will get some options and will be able to choose how the target beneath, so the child object, behaves. So every action you apply to this master hub will be transferred to everything, and for these local hubs you can choose how the actions will be transferred. It's also worth mentioning that you can right click on these guys and do various commands like copy, paste, replace, and stuff like that. Now we just copy this guy like this. Accidentally copied the Cmotion object also, so I'll get rid of this material and apply maybe this one. I'll add this guy as a child, as a target of this local hub. Now by pressing play, I'll get this motion, which is a bit odd, but we already told we will explain this on a better example. So here, if I select this guy, I can choose what drives the motion. Currently it's set to step, so if I choose the driver to be none, then my object will stay stationary, and that is because I'm instructing it to not be driven by my hub, path, or steps. I really think this is logical. So basically, I'm telling this object not to listen to this local hub. It's a local master. Now I will get rid of this guy and this push Z action, and actually I can delete this also, and we will talk now a little bit about these guys here, and everything inside Cmotion works together. So it's really difficult to isolate something and explain without adjusting other parameters or leave those parameters out. Now I will add a simple action to this object. So let's go with this push Z. So we will add this action, and if I hit play, well, nothing will happen. Let's try to increase this value, and once again, nothing will happen. So to get any movement, I'll have to change this spline. So you actually see I'm moving this guy. So this is now the motion we get. The problem with this is it is always going back to its initial position. So it's cyclic and goes into loop. Let me just undo this, and naturally now we will have 0 movement because simply we are saying via this spline we don't want any motion. Now here is where these options come in really handy, and they're designed to create linear non-cyclic movement. And for that to happen, you don't even have to have this action assigned, because everything assigned here will concern this global hub. At least that is my understanding of it. So currently this is set to static. So if something is static and you hit play, nothing will happen. But if you change this to line, watch what happens. Our object is happily traveling, regardless of these actions here. So that is a simple explanation. Here, by this stride parameter, let's actually hit play and change this. You're instructing how fast, or better, how much distance this object is covering during this time. So effectively, let's work with the round value. So I will enter 100 here. So if I put more time here, let's say 120, the object will move slower. So that's a really similar concept to what we had in animation crash course. Au contraire, if we set this to 30, it will travel faster to cover this stride length in this given time. So if you set this to 10, it will go really fast from its origin. So let's wait for the timeline, and here it is. Let's go back, and maybe I will set this to 90 frames. So we have much less time to wait for it to come back into visible area to us. So let's go back here. Now we have a lot of options here. So let's actually put this to something reasonable like 60. And by direction, we're simply defining the direction in which this object will travel. I hope that is easily understandable. So it's alive and you can change the values on the fly. This gradient, it's simply let's say a vertical direction, which is not really technically correct, but it will really give you a good understanding of it. And everything you set here is actually this guy. You are creating a motion for this master hub with these parameters here. So it will obey that motion. Okay, let's do something like this. And this doesn't mean you cannot add actions to these local hubs. Of course you can. Now here under driver we only have path and none. That is due to some walk cycle genes once again. So currently our local hub has only the option to obey the path, which will make it to travel like this, so it will obey this motion, or none, which will simply instruct this object, this local hub, to not be driven by the parameters of this guy, which are set here. This really sounds complicated, but it is not. So let me just show you, if I press play, that I can create various motions. So let's maybe roll this guy, and let's even create another action, maybe pitch, rotation X. Let's add it, and let's load maybe a cubic spline. So you can create a really complex motion. So imagine an airplane or a leaf falling or stuff like that. So you can either drive the local hub with anything with which it can be driven, or none. So it will simply hover like this. And I'm pretty sure that this is a lot to absorb in a single lesson, but really take your time, because the results you can achieve with this Cmotion are simply fantastic. And I will show you some really good uses of Cmotion outside its comfort zone in later lessons. So to sum things up, you can use these master controls, in the lack of better terms, to create a linear continuous motion, and use this action window to assign a bunch of actions which are available here. So you see we have a lot of options here. We can reference the motion, we can use Python code, we can use parameters. So I will show you this in next lessons, because this Cmotion is simply a monster. It is huge and complex, and it is a system with a lot of muscle, and we just scratched the surface. So we will now take a little break and continue in our next lesson, where I will create a simple character rig only to show you some concepts that are best described with the use of something that has, well, legs. So let's take a break. I'm sure you need one, and let's continue in our next lesson.